there were hundreds of people who had disappeared after the war whose bodies had not been recovered. That was a fact, and it's actually still a fact today. I think today the Kosovo War is kind of forgotten. So much has happened since then, 9/11 and the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. This was the biggest Western military engagement in Europe since Second World War. At the time, it was a big deal. We went into Kosovo right after the war, Stephen Smith, my colleague, and myself, and we wanted to focus on one village that had been the scene of a terrible massacre by Serbian paramilitaries. We did a whole documentary kind of anatomy of a war crime. But what we found along the way, and this is just a month after the war, was that the crimes hadn't stopped. What we were finding after the war, after the Serbian military had been driven out by NATO and the ethnic Albanians had returned to Kosovo, there was an underbelly. There were crimes that were committed not by the Serbs, but by ethnic Albanian guerrillas. At the time, these crimes were seen as crimes of vengeance. These were Serbs and other minorities disappearing. And the allegation was that they were disappearing at the hands of the Kosovo Liberation Army. This is the ethnic Albanian guerrilla group that had taken up arms to get independence from Serbia. What we found is that people were disappearing, but many of the people were alive. They were being kidnapped. And we had assumed that kidnapping usually involves some kind of ransom, so we assumed the gangsters were moving in and kidnapping people and holding them so they would be exchanged for money or for Albanian prisoners who were being held in Serbian jails. But that wasn't happening. There weren't any ransoms. People were just vanishing without a trace. We started hearing stories about Serbs and other minorities who had been kidnapped, that they'd actually been captured, put in trucks, and driven across the border to Albania. People were being taken alive across the border. Well, why? If this was a crime of vengeance, why would you bother keeping someone alive and taking them across the border at some risk and at some cost? And that's where the story really started getting strange. The soldiers were given special orders not to mistreat them, not to abuse them. And when they got to the other side of the border, to these houses or these makeshift detention facilities, there were doctors present. They were told that the doctors were there to do medical checks. Then the story that some of these men started saying was that these captives, some of them were being selected, moved to other locations, and ultimately killed, and their organs, namely their kidneys, were extracted, shipped out of the country for illicit organ transplants. And we know at the time there was a thriving industry in Istanbul, Turkey, for illicit organ transplants. People coming from Israel, from the Middle East, and paying hundreds of thousands of dollars for these kidneys. It seemed like absolute science fiction. We honed in on one man. He was a young ethnic Albanian who had joined the Kosovo Liberation Army for the reason of getting independence from Serbia. And he ended up driving what he said were two ethnic Serbs from one sort of safe house to another in Albania. They somehow had gotten wind of what was going on in terms of people being killed for their organs. And they pleaded with him to shoot them so they wouldn't be cut up for body parts. He was disgusted by that. And this man never asked anything from us. No money, no women. But still, even if we believed in him, you need details. We were able to isolate one location. This is a house in central Albania where we believed some of these captives were taken. That became known as the Yellow House. We got the location, and one day I made the trip there. I went with an Albanian driver and a translator. And luck would have it that our car broke down about a mile from the village. So we decided to walk into the village, and keeping in mind that this is a place where supposedly some really, really bad things went down, very remote. They don't see foreigners very often. So we walked down a muddy road through these homes, pretty poor area, and we saw the house kind of sitting on its own across this field. And there was a tiny little shop nearby that sold soft drinks. And so we stopped there, But then we were surrounded by villagers and people were asking questions. And I realized that I didn't feel comfortable telling these people that I was a journalist and what I was there for. I mean, I didn't feel safe. The road ends at that house and it doesn't go further into the mountains. And so I concocted a ridiculous story that I was a highway engineer looking at the possibility of whether the road that ended there could be continued through a narrow mountain pass to connect with another town. That was my cover story, and it must have seemed absurd to the villagers, but I wasn't about to tell them that I was there looking for an organ harvesting operation and asking them were there any Serb civilians buried nearby. Whatever the villagers believed, I don't know, but it was enough to get us out of there. We knew that the only way to prove that any of this happened was to find the bodies of the victims and try to determine how they were killed and whether they went through some kind of surgical procedures before or after their death. We were not in any position to go dig for bodies in Albania. We did not have the resources, and frankly, we didn't have any kind of legal position to be digging up graves in Albania. So we went to the UN on the humanitarian side, thinking that this was information that could be helpful to them and hoping that it might make a breakthrough in the investigation. The UN got interested. They recognized that there were hundreds of people who had disappeared after the war whose bodies had not been recovered. That was a fact, and it's actually still a fact today. They assembled a group of experts and they went to the house, and I went along, as did my colleague Stephen Smith. When we arrived at this house with local Albanian police, with all these UN people with hazmat suits, the family that was living in the house was there. A few other villagers had arrived. It was a very strange scene. The team went right to work, and within a few hours, they found a few curious things. They found some IV drip bags that had been out in the dirt outside the house. They found injectable drugs that were in the garbage. They determined that some of those drugs could be used as muscle relaxants during surgical operations. And then perhaps the strangest thing was at night, we went back to the house and the team decided to test some of the surfaces, the floors in the house. And they used a substance called luminol, which illuminates areas where there may have been blood. So this team started spraying in what was the living room. And to our amazement, a lot of the floor lit up. There were indications that there had been considerable blood on that floor. But there was one place, and it was the middle of the floor, and there was a kind of a rectangular spot where there weren't any indications of blood. Was it an operating table? We didn't know. Just as strange when the team leader started asking the family members why there may have been blood on this floor. They came up with different answers. At one point, one of the men who lived at the house said his wife had given birth in the room. And that, I guess, in his mind explained why there would be evidence of huge amounts of blood on the floor. Unfortunately, his wife contradicted that the next day. And then the man said, well, we slaughter animals in that room as part of a Muslim holiday, which seemed really weird that you would slaughter animals in your living room. There was no conclusive proof of anything. There was enticing evidence, but we didn't know. As we were driving away, coming back on this dirt road, a group of villagers of men came down to the road and blocked our way out. They said very clearly, nothing happened here, no one was brought here, and essentially, it's time to leave now. I think the message was, we don't want to see you back here. The evidence was boxed up, it went back to Kosovo, and it was eventually shipped to the War Crimes Tribunal in The Hague. What we found out many years later is that the UN in The Hague did nothing with that evidence. They didn't have it analyzed. When prosecutors determined that this case in Albania of the Yellow House did not relate to any of their current cases, they destroyed the evidence. We had hit a brick wall. We could not publish this story with the evidence we had. And then here's what happened. The former UN prosecutor in The Hague, a woman named Carla Del Ponte, published her memoirs. And in her memoirs, she included information we had developed and given to the UN in Kosovo. The allegations of the organ trafficking, the allegations that the Kosovo Liberation Army was involved. She put it in her book our information in her book, and the story exploded in the Balkans. I went back to Kosovo at the time, and we were able to nail down the fact that there were secret detention facilities in Albania that the Kosovo Liberation Army was running. That led to convictions of former KLA leaders, but it did not nail down the organ trafficking allegations. And the problem was, I was in Kosovo trying to find my old sources. No one wanted to talk about this because it had become such a political issue. Anyone who dared suggest that Kosovo Liberation Army were involved in this kind of organ trafficking, they were risking their own death. Even if something happened, I can't prove it, and there's no one else who's going to step in and do that. It turns out there were people who wanted to get to the bottom of it. The Council of Europe, responding to this book, appointed one of their top investigators, a Swiss senator named Dick Marty. He had actually helped expose the secret CIA black sites in Europe that were used to detain and interrogate and torture terrorist suspects. What Marty found was that there was indeed a conspiracy among former Kosovo Liberation Army operatives and officers that went to the top, including the Prime Minister of Kosovo, a group of people who were involved in drug trafficking and a wide range of criminal activities, and that it included organ trafficking. There was the Yellow House, the house I had visited twice. Marty concluded that indeed people had been taken to the house, people had been raped, villagers had participated in this, their silence had been paid for with women or drugs, and some people had been killed at the house. Marty found the second house where people had been held, and then they had been taken individually and executed, gunshots to the back of the head, and then their kidneys were extracted at a clinic nearby. Those kidneys were then exported for illegal organ transplant operations. It was very strange to see that this picture that we had vaguely carved out was coming into focus, was really amazing, and in a way scary, because I think back to the village that I had wandered into, that was a place where horrible things happened, and that allegedly the villagers knew all about it, and some of them even participated. You know, in retrospect, I would probably think twice about what I did going into that village, knowing what I know now.
These people sell organs.
Well, that I finally found that one. We can't get great for 100 letter. I'm like, let's do this. Very well. Small, but going out. All right, I will see some. I'll be in Thursday.
So they gave up. Okay. They gave up. You got the same email on LinkedIn.
The same email?
Yeah. I'll just send this.
Alright, so this is a Nova Scotian organ trafficking hotbed. This whole building. So we're investigating some shit. Alright? So, whatever happens, we're recording. This is the Columbia Tower. there's a lot of organ trafficking businesses and operations working hand in hand with the Bell Harbor Conferencing Center, which is an organ hospital. Is this? Hi, I'm looking for a specific business. What is it you guys do here? Capital management group? Oh, investments and stuff? Okay. Like for like investments in like company investments or like property or like any like no I was told to take a look at this for one of my businesses, but yeah. So I was told to just talk. What do you guys do? Like you guys just what do you guys financial consulting? What do you guys do?
Who are you talking
I run I work with a defense company. Sorry, I was out working out, so these are my like gym clothes. But
We can't talk in situations like this. You have to call the front desk.
oh, front desk.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you guys do though?
You have to call and ask.
Oh yeah, you don't even know what you do.
We don't take walk-ins to fill out surveys and stuff like that.
Oh, okay, it's not a survey. All right, thank you.
All right. Thanks.
All right. Hey, how's it going? I was supposed to meet somebody here. Ben Collins.
Let me see if he's checked in yet.
Uh-huh.
You're more than welcome to see on this side.
All right, thank you.
Ben Collins checked
No, it's not.
So not quite sure. Were you guys like having like a lunch meeting?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, what time?
We already have
It was supposed to be like 3-ish. I run a defense company. I'm sorry I'm in my workout clothes, but
Oh yeah, so do you have like a number like where you can contact him?
yeah, I'll just do that. I thought maybe he'd be here already.
Yeah, I mean you said 3 o'clock.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah,
If
3
it
o'clock
isn't
ish.
closed off, I'll make sure to close it off until.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're more than welcome to take a seat on this side since you are on this side. I can't have you on this side. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Alright.
Okay, so I can't just have you wander everywhere.
Okay. So I was just looking if I could find him.
Yeah, so
I'm just gonna go find him throughout the building or outside or somewhere. I'll call him. My cell phone's not working that great.
these elevators will take you guys.
Thank you.
floor 74.
Experience living downtown, Fountain Court. I got that everywhere. Experience living. Life is short. Break the rules. Forgive quickly. Kiss slowly. Love truly. Laugh unconditionally. And never regret anything that made you smile, including your new organs. An Essex community. Now we know what Essex communities are about. Got a very Necron look in here. In the heart of Seattle. So that's what they're taking. People in Seattle. The Nova Scotian hotbed. Yeah. They got a little place you can work out at after you get your new transplant. Nice little gated community. And then for the budget folks, over here, we got the Sydney apartments. Alright? This is for the budget people, right? It's for the people who can't afford the life of the spring for recovery. They recover here. It's your basic necessities. Nothing fancy. Let's go in here and take a look. Oh, they're blocked. Hi, I wanted to ask a couple questions. Hey. So basically, I was just like wondering more about this place. Like, what is like you guys think here?
Yeah, no problem. I would be happy to help you, but I'm actually working with a new move-in, so if I come back in about 30 minutes, I'm happy to help you.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you.
We got a little recovery place for the old folks.
The trade in human organs and other forms of human trafficking from the poorest countries in the world is growing every year. Organ Watch, Berkeley University, California, has estimated that 15,000 organs are trafficked every year. The sale of organs from impoverished European countries to the rich and privileged globally is perhaps a subject which is too close for comfort. Nothing demonstrates more clearly the increasing gap between the rich and poor within Europe and her direct neighbours than this booming trade in human misery. Criminal networks are targeting European countries such as Estonia, Bulgaria, Turkey, Georgia, Russia, Romania, Moldova and Ukraine, where people are lured into selling their kidneys for as little as $3,000.
Un timp m-am gândit și să fac, nu știam și dar pe urmă m-am gândit și nu știu, și putem să mai zic, m-am gândit că la moarte, cred, nu mă mai duc. Și ori de bucurie ca să mi-au propus $3,000 în anul ăsta atâția bani în mâna mea, bucurie că mă duc, nu m-am mai gândit nimic. De-amul când am ajuns acolo, aproape de operație, de atunci mă gândeam și așa și cum așa.
Recent research reveals a trail in illegal organ trafficking, leading from Moldova to a variety of countries, where kidneys are sold to Israelis, Arabs and Western Europeans. Globally, 1 million die each year of kidney failure. Only 60,000 receive a kidney transplant. People in rich countries, particularly those with legal systems and religious beliefs that prevent easy access to post-mortem donors, will do almost anything for a kidney.
In a year period, one expects in Britain for there to be almost 2,000 operations a year, which gives somebody a new kidney. Sadly, 400 people will also die on that waiting list, waiting for the kidney that they didn't get. An additional 3,000 people will die whilst on dialysis.
Throughout Moldova, people lack even basic needs due to widespread unemployment and poverty. Mikhail, who grew up in a typical Moldovan village, was 26 years old when his kidney was removed. He is now 32 years old, living from hand to mouth.
Un coleg de clasă de meu, un frate mai mic, Vitali, m-a auzit că e că au fost în Turcia și dat un rinichi și de unul în altul m-am întâlnit cu dânsul și mi-a spus că e ca și-o făcut și mi-a propus și mie. Și am stat un timp și m-am gândit, dacă nu aveam bani, am stat un timp și m-am gândit și pe urmă s-a cotit să plec.
One day after the operation, he was taken to the surgeon's private apartment, where he was hidden for a few days. The traffickers collected him and dumped him on a public bus with no painkillers. For 24 hours, his newly operated body was shaken about, causing him terrible pain. The traffickers had not even supplied him with the essential documents to cross the border and return home. So Mikhail had to bribe the border police with $500 from the $3,000 he had received from the traffickers. Without essential all-round pre- and post-medical treatment with rest and avoidance of hard physical work, people like Mikhail often never recover fully from having sold a kidney.
După aceea am venit acasă, vroiam să lucrez ceva și nu puteam. Dar să duc o caldare de apă, nu puteam, mă dorie, dar să fac și nu puteam. Și deci mă gândeam, că ia că trebuie să lucrează, dar eu nu pot lucra. Dar că îmi pare rău, dădeam. Nu știam cum, deodată când m-am dus cum a și, dar pe urmă am văzut și îmi pare rău, dădeam. Nu puteai întoarce nimic înapoi.
A medical worker in Mingia, a small town close to the capital, reported that about 36 out of 7,000 people have sold a kidney. The real figures are probably higher, as guilt and shame prevent donors contacting medical workers. Globally, the demand for fresh, healthy human organs is greater than the present legal supply and is increasing every year. Worldwide, the poor are cheated, maimed, and sometimes murdered by ruthless organ traffickers. People with kidney failure in dialysis are faced with an ethical dilemma. Shall I continue to suffer while waiting for a legal transplant and perhaps even die? Or shall I buy an illegal kidney abroad, now?
Because the waiting lists are long in Denmark, some people get so desperate that they choose an alternative, and that is going abroad to buy a kidney.
32-year-old Mads from Denmark is suffering from a kidney failure. To survive, he must receive dialysis 4 times a week to prevent his body from being poisoned by waste products. In his local hospital, there is a special department that trains people with kidney failure to use dialysis machines.
You have to go to dialysis immediately to get your blood cleaned. And that was from one day to another, more or less, that I started dialysis. So already from when I was admitted to the hospital, I was a hemodialysis patient, which is a thing that the body really has to get used to. So those first 2.5 months were really awful because my body really wasn't coping with dialysis very well. It stresses the body very much. And now I'm going to do the worst part of the dialysis, where I have to insert the needles. The first hour or so I'm okay, and then I start getting more and more confused and dizzy and just not very focused. Sometimes I get a headache from it, and sometimes I get a bit nauseous. And then after dialysis, I'm completely knackered. I'm very unfocused, and I'm very confused, and I really just need to get home and not concentrate about anything, just sit on the sofa and watch television or something like that. Not do anything that requires any brain capacity. And that's how it is. Well, the first symptoms I had was about 2 years ago, in March 2006, where I began to have an earache. I was visiting my girlfriend in London, and when I landed, I had an earache, and I thought it was from the plane ride, but then it got worse, and I started throwing up. I started getting extremely restless, and I couldn't sleep for almost a week. And then, after about a week and a half, I got admitted to the hospital and was diagnosed with acute kidney failure. And that was how it all started.
Europe's poorest country, Moldova, has during the last 10 years become steadily poorer. The average monthly salary is less than $50. 25% of the 3.8 million population have migrated in search of work and a better life. Villages across Moldova are depopulating at an alarming rate, leaving behind mainly the old, the sick, and children. The remaining are easy targets for kidney traffickers. Generations of children are growing up without one or both of their parents. The negative long-time impact on the healthy, psychological and social development of these children is massive. Andrei is an unskilled Moldovan agricultural worker and a victim of kidney trafficking. 6 years ago, 34-year-old Andrei and his wife Angela were trying to scrape a living together for themselves and their children. They lived in one of hundreds of poverty-stricken villages that typify the Moldovan countryside.
Pâinea asta nu-ți dădea, bani nu-ți dădeau. Era greu, lemn de foc trebuie. Casa era atât din ulut, sărăsche, gard n-aveai, trebuie o vacă, o lapte la copil. Deci că trebuie mult pentru la 3 copii, trebuie mult.
Angela was approached by a kidney trafficker who promised her $3,000, a visa, a passport, and transport expenses for her kidney to be removed and sold in Turkey. After the documents had been prepared by the trafficker, Angela suddenly discovered she was pregnant with their third child.
Situația era grea pe partea banilor. Am hotărât să plec eu. La începutul mai. Au venit și ne-a spus că să ducem să facem documentele. Am fost și făcut documentele în mai, din banii lor. Am mai lucrat până pe 25-26 iunie.
After the operation, Andrei returned to Moldova. After 2 years, Andrei and Angela faced the same problem which had forced them to sell a kidney in the first place: no work and grinding poverty. Desperate, Angela decided as the last resort to take up work as a housekeeper in Italy. But Angela could not bear to be parted from her children and rang home nearly every day weeping. After some months in Italy, she fell ill and was found to be suffering from multiple brain tumours. Terminally ill, Angela returned home and after a few brief months died. Andre had to provide now for the family both emotionally and financially, but he could not do both.
La stație îmi dă 88 de lei primesc pentru copii pe întrețin. Și dacă nu lucrezi nicăieri, nu faci nicozi 280 de lei, pentru că lumina s-a scumpit, tot s-a scumpit în ziua de azi. Trebuie să mai duci la lucru. Și vrei, nu vrei, trebuie să duci. Dar și la noi nu-i de lucru. În primul rând, lucrezi, dar nu-ți dau bani. Și am fost, de-am cum la Moscova am fost. Ca să în satul rămas bătrânii care mai pot, și pământul rămân pe roagă, nu are cine prelucra, cote, înainte vreau să pământ, nu trebuie la nimeni, rămân tăte așa. Nu e aceeași putere, nu e aceeași, cum spunem, simți, când într-adevăr obosești mai repede, nu ca cum era înainte. Lucru greu. 3 luni de zile, din dimineața la 8 până la 8, dacă era și câteodată și până la 12, cumva cum lucram și pe ploaie, și pe ninsoare, și pe frig, și cum era. Schimbai de haine, tot, și lucram.
Și cuminți să ascultați, bun? L-ați văzut că ați văzut cu sumcă de asta de dulciuri, bun? Ca rând trecut, v-am adus. Hai. Știți cuminți, închideți ușa.
Thirteen-year-old Ian has to do everything in the home, including looking after his brothers who are 9 and 6, also when they are sick. He tries his best, but he's too young to cope with everything, and the children therefore suffer from neglect and its consequences, physically, psychologically and socially.
Era mamă, era mai gine, mai ușor, mai avem, mai alina, mai mângâie, dar și am o tata, mamă și tata.
Pe de o parte, migrarea în masă a cetățenilor a servit și acel teren fertil pentru traficanți, pentru a face abuzuri și pe unii din cetățeni ai înșela sub pretextul angajării în câmpul muncii peste hotare. Femeile de obicei erau duse în țările din Europa de Vest, unde erau exploatate sexual. Traficul de organe, iarăși oamenii erau înșelați, erau duși în eroare de faptul care ar fi consecința în cazul prelevării unui rinichi, pentru că majoritatea cazurilor, sau cel puțin care ne-am depistat noi organele de drept, a fost cazul prelevare de rinichi, cu toate că ar putea fi și prelevare de o parte din ficat, două organe care ar putea omul supraviețui. Noi am depistat 2 filiere de trafic de organe, o filieră cea mai importantă a fost Turcia și o altă filieră este Germania.
Anatoly had a kidney removed and sold in Germany. While looking for work, some men offered him a huge sum of money for his kidney.
O cunoscută din Iednes, cunoștea personal care se ocupă cu așa ceva. Și mi-a propus mie, dacă vrei să faci o sumă care de bani, ia că de rinichi și iei contra $10,000 americani.
Knowing exactly how to manipulate Anatoly, the traffickers first convinced him he would not feel any different after the operation. They coached him and instructed him on arrival in Germany to pretend that the complete stranger receiving his kidney was in fact his long-lost, beloved uncle from Israel.
El m-a consultat și trebuie să spun și să vorbesc cui trebuie să dau, cine el, de unde el, tot neamul raiului care care sunt de la copii până la nepoți, să știu pe tăți, pe nume, pe...
Professor Mühlbacher from Austria was tricked into performing a kidney transplant by the same methods. He operated on a man who said he was giving his kidney to a family member. Years later, the true story was revealed.
We had all the steps of investigations were carried out as usual, and they were performing and acting, and we just believed them. And they also passed our psychologist, who is very accurate in detecting things like acting and performing.
Nu ne-a crezut. Nu ne-a crezut, nu că nu ne-a crezut, dar au spus că nu vorbim într-o limbă, dar vorbim română cu el. Dacă el română o știu cum el moldovan, nu știu, tot așa. Și au spus că nu grăim într-o limbă și nu a trecut cu vorbire.
Years later, 5 years later after transplantation, when the donor was caught as he was a small criminal, he stole something in a department store, and he was put to jail, and they found his car on his flank, and it turned out that he was operated in my institution. My friend did a nephrectomy, I did the transplant, and we read it basically in the Lancet because it was published in the highly respected journal Lancet as a letter to the editor. So it means we cannot be 100% sure that we are not fooled again.
Era vorba să plecăm în România, de acolo, din la nemți, să plecăm în România. La operație. Și nu ne-au dus în România, dar tot în Germania, în alt oraș, în Iena. Și dar acolo iar am trecut. Dar m-a întrebat, tot așa, m-a întrebat de unde, cum, cine se o luie, cu ce mă ocup, și am, și îi dau, pentru și îi dau, am nevoie de bani, ori suntem rude, numai din jele. Și am spus, din jele, când nu între bani, că eu sunt plin de bani, și că am fabrică în România, am fabrica mea de mobilă și spus și eu, și trebuie și nu trebuie, numai să trec. Și acolo am trecut.
In the northern part of Moldova, a special prison has been built to house policemen, lawyers, judges, etc. Marin, a former policeman convicted of organ trafficking, is serving his 10-year sentence there. Marin's son was seriously ill and required a liver transplant to survive.
Umblând și căutând acești bani, am dat peste acești oameni care se ocupă cu traficarea organelor. Și ei mi-au propus, da, dacă este așa un caz că se poate de făcut barter.
With no cash in hand, he was tempted to work with a trafficking network and made a deal with them to sell his own kidney in exchange for a liver transplant for his son.
Undeva în timp de 2 zile mi-au făcut analizele medicale și în timp de 1 săptămână de zile a fost făcut transplantul.
Operația a fost noaptea sau
noaptea? Nu știu de ce, dar numai noaptea. Era undeva vreo 6 oameni, noaptea s-a fost făcut operația. Din Ucraina era, de la noi din Moldova, din Africa era și mai erau cineva acolo, dar eu n-am putut contacta cu ei. Nu cunoșteam limba.
Shortly after his operation, he returned to Moldova and then travelled immediately back to Istanbul.
Copilajul cât avea?
1 an de zile.
Și i s-a făcut, nu știu, are o...
Păi da, au avut, pentru că copilul a murit. Copilul a murit. Eu am rămas invalid, fără nici copilul a murit.
Copilul a murit.
Da, copilul a murit. Copilul, da, după operație nu a rezistat.
On returning home, Marin then decided to contact the criminal network, and he consequently became involved in a trafficking ring, which resulted in the conviction he is now serving. Throughout the world, there are thousands of people dying slowly on dialysis, and these numbers are unfortunately growing. Radical action taken by many countries would result in the availability of more organs, which could be harvested legally from brain-dead patients. Globally, this would immediately have a profound impact on the number of available organs. In 2008, the legal supply simply does not meet the demand, and therefore there is a steady and increasing flow of living donor organs from the poor to the rich. Are we going to stand by and allow organ trafficking to flourish? Are we going to passively allow those people who either cannot afford to buy on the black market or have an unshakable moral and ethical value to suffer and die? Has the time come to bring this issue out into the open, wake up the politicians, the general public, and to take action? Europe's poorest country, Moldova, has during the last 10 years become steadily poorer. The average monthly salary is less than $50. 25% of the 3.8 million population have migrated in search of work and a better life. Villages across Moldova are depopulating at an alarming rate, leaving behind mainly the old, the sick, and children. The remaining are easy targets for kidney traffickers. Generations of children are growing up without one or both of their parents. The negative long-time impact on the healthy, psychological and social development of these children is massive. Andrei is an unskilled Moldovan agricultural worker and a victim of kidney trafficking. 6 years ago, 34-year-old Andrei and his wife Angela were trying to scrape a living together for themselves and their children. They lived in one of hundreds of poverty-stricken villages that typify the Moldovan countryside.
Pâinea asta nu-ți dă de bani, nu-ți dă de eu. Era greu, lemn de foc trebuie. Casa era atât din ulut, sărăsche, gard n-aveai, trebuie o vacă, o lapte la copil. Deci că trebuie mult pentru la 3 copii, trebuie mult.
Angela was approached by a kidney trafficker who promised her $3,000, a visa, a passport, and transport expenses for her kidney to be removed and sold in Turkey. After the documents had been prepared by the trafficker, Angela suddenly discovered she was pregnant with their third child.
Situația era grea pe partea banilor. Am hotărât să plec eu. La începutul mai. Venit și ne-a spus că să ducem să facem documentele. Am fost să fac documentele în mai, din banii lor. Am mai lucrat până pe 25-26 iunie.
After the operation, Andrei returned to Moldova. After 2 years, Andrei and Angela faced the same problem which had forced them to sell a kidney in the first place: no work and grinding poverty. Desperate, Angela decided as the last resort to take up work as a housekeeper in Italy. But Angela could not bear to be parted from her children and rang home nearly every day weeping. After some months in Italy, she fell ill and was found to be suffering from multiple brain tumours. Terminally ill, Angela returned home and after a few brief months died. Andrei had to provide now for the family both emotionally and financially, but he could not do both.
La stație îmi dă 88 de lei primesc pe 3 copii pe întrețin. Și dacă lucrezi nicăieri, nu faci nicozi 280 de lei, pentru că lumina că s-o scumpit, tot s-o scumpit în ziua de azi. Trebuie să mai duci la lucru. Vrei, nu vrei, trebuie să duci. Dar și la noi nu-i de lucru. În primul rând, lucrezi, dar nu-ți dau bani. Și am fost, de-am cum la Moscova am fost. Ca să rămân în satul rămas bătrânii care mai pot, pământul rămân pe roagă, nu are cine prelucra, cote, înainte vreau să pământ, am nu trebuie la nimeni rămân tot așa. Nu e aceeași putere, nu e aceeași, cum spunem, simți, când într-adevăr obosești mai repede, nu ca cum era înainte. Lucru greu. 3 luni de zile, din dimineața la 8 până la 8, dacă era și câteodată și până la 12, cumva cum lucram și pe ploaie, și pe ninsoare, și pe frig, și cum era. Schimba de haine, tot, și lucram.
Și cu mine să ascultați, bun? L-ați văzut că ați văzut cu sumcă de asta de dulciuri, bun? Ca rând trecut, v-am adus. Hai. Știți cu mine, închideți ușa.
Thirteen-year-old Ian has to do everything in the home, including looking after his brothers who are 9 and 6, also when they are sick. He tries his best, but he's too young to cope with everything, and the children therefore suffer from neglect and its consequences, physically, psychologically, and socially.
Era mamă, era mai geni, mai ușor. Mai avem, mai alina, mai mângâie, și am tata, mamă și tata.
Pe de o parte, migrarea în masă a cetățenilor a servit și acel teren fertil pentru traficanți, pentru a face abuzuri și pe unii din cetățeni ai înșela sub pretextul angajării în câmpul muncii peste hotare. Femeile de obicei erau duse în țările din Europa de Vest, unde erau exploatate sexual. Traficul de organe, iarăși oamenii erau înșelați, erau duși în eroare de faptul care ar fi consecința în cazul prelevării unui rinichi, pentru că majoritatea cazurilor, sau cel puțin care ne-am depistat noi organele de drept, au fost cazul prelevare de rinichi, cu toate că ar putea fi și prelevare de o parte din ficat, două organe care ar putea omul supraviețui. Noi am depistat 2 filiere de trafic de organe, o filieră cea mai importantă a fost Turcia și o altă filieră este Germania.
Anatoly had a kidney removed and sold in Germany. While looking for work, some men offered him a huge sum of money for his kidney.
O cunoscută din Iednis, o cunoște personal care se ocupă cu așa ceva. Și mi-a propus mie, dacă vrei să faci o sumă care de bani, ia că de rinichi și ei contra $10,000 americani.
Knowing exactly how to manipulate Anatoly, the traffickers first convinced him he would not feel any different after the operation. They coached him and instructed him on arrival in Germany to pretend that the complete stranger receiving his kidney was in fact his long-lost, beloved uncle from Israel.
El m-a consultat și trebuie să spun și să vorbesc cui trebuie să dau, cine el, de unde el, tot neamul raia lui care sunt de la copii până la nepoți, să știu pe tăți, pe nume, pe...
Professor Mühlbacher from Austria was tricked into performing a kidney transplant by the same methods. He operated on a man who said he was giving his kidney to a family member. Years later, the true story was revealed.
We had all the steps of investigations were carried out as usual, and they were performing and acting, and we just believed them. And they also passed our psychologist, who is very accurate in detecting things like acting and performing.
Nu ne-a crezut. Nu ne-a crezut, nu că nu ne-a crezut, dar au spus că nu vorbim într-o limbă, dar vorbim română cu el. Dacă eu român o știu cum el moldovan, nu știi, tot așa e. Și a spus că nu grăim într-o limbă și nu a trecut cu vorbire.
Years later, 5 years later after transplantation, when the donor was caught as he was a small criminal, he stole something in the department store, and he was put to jail, and they found his car on his flank, and it turned out that he was operated in my institution. My friend did the nephrectomy, I did the transplant, and we read it basically in the Lancet because it was published in the highly respected journal Lancet as a letter to the editor. So it means we cannot be 100% sure that we are not fooled again.
Era vorba să plecăm în România, de acolo, din la nemți, să plecăm în România. La operație. Și nu ne dus în România, dar dus tot în Germania, în alt oraș, în Iena. Și dăm acolo iar am trecut. M-am întrebat tot așa, m-am întrebat de unde, cum, cine se oluie, cu ce mă ocup, și am, și dau, pentru și dau, am nevoie de bani, ori suntem rude, numai din jele. Și am spus că din jele, când nu intră bani, că eu sunt plin de bani și că am fabrică în România, am fabrica mea de mobilă și spus și eu și trebuie și nu trebuie, numai să trec. Și acolo am trecut.
In the northern part of Moldova, a special prison has been built to house policemen, lawyers, judges, etc. Marin, a former policeman convicted of organ trafficking, is serving his 10-year sentence there. Marin's son was seriously ill and required a liver transplant to survive.
Umblând și căutând acești bani, am dat peste acești oameni care se ocupă cu traficarea organelor. Și ei mi-au propus, da, dacă este așa un caz că se poate de făcut barter.
With no cash in hand, he was tempted to work with a trafficking network and made a deal with them to sell his own kidney in exchange for a liver transplant for his son.
Undeva în timp de 2 zile mi-au făcut analizele medicale și în timp de 1 săptămână de zile a fost făcut transplantul.
Operația a fost noaptea sau
Noaptea. Nu știu de ce, dar numai noaptea. Era undeva vreo 6 oameni, noaptea a fost făcut operația. Din Ucraina era, de la noi din Moldova, din Africa era și mai erau cineva acolo, dar n-am putut contacta cu ei. Nu cunoșteam limba.
Shortly after his operation, he returned to Moldova and then travelled immediately back to Istanbul.
Copilașul cât avea?
1 an de zile.
Și ni s-a făcut, cum nu știu, are o...
Păi da, au avut, pentru că copilul a murit. Copilul a murit. Eu am rămas invalid, fără nici copilul a murit.
Copilul a murit.
Da, copilul a murit. Copilul, da, după operație nu a rezistat.
On returning home, Marin then decided to contact the criminal network, and he consequently became involved in a trafficking ring, which resulted in the conviction he is now serving. Throughout the world, there are thousands of people dying slowly on dialysis, and these numbers are unfortunately growing. Radical action taken by many countries would result in the availability of more organs, which could be harvested legally from brain-dead patients. Globally, this would immediately have a profound impact on the number of available organs. In 2008, the legal supply simply does not meet the demand, and therefore there is a steady and increasing flow of living donor organs from the poor to the rich. Are we going to stand by and allow organ trafficking to flourish? Are we going to passively allow those people who either cannot afford to buy on the black market or have an unshakable moral and ethical value to suffer and die? Has the time come to bring this issue out into the open, wake up the politicians, the general public, and to take action?
will have to forgive me, ladies and gentlemen, I am extremely nervous. So far, my track record with public speaking has involved sweating profusely and then tremulous silence. A new friend suggested to me that I make myself more personable to you in an attempt to win your vote through affection or pity, if not the compelling arguments I were going to make. He also said that a story is much more compelling than a list of reasons. So, go with me to a notary, seal me there your single bond, and, in a merry sport, if you not repay me on such a day, in such a place, such sum or sums as are expressed in the condition, let the forfeit be nominated for an equal pound of your fair flesh, to be cut off and taken in what part of your body pleaseth me. This pound of flesh which I demand from him is dearly bought, it is mine, and I will have it. If you deny me, fie upon your law. There is no force in the decrees of Venice. If you don't know what I'm talking about, and I kind of don't myself, that was an amalgamation of several speeches made by Shylock in The Merchant of Venice. As a point, they never give us very flattering speeches. There's too much anti-Semitism in the water. This was written by Shakespeare in 1597 and portrays the creditor of a man desperate for money, bargaining his friend's flesh as security for the exchange. The court, revolted but seemingly bound by law, is saved by the quick wit of Portia. Even then, there was an inherent horror in monetary exchange for living flesh. Years later, we find still the same echoes of an age-old exchange. Here is a story of Kala, a young woman in the Chennai slums of India. Her life devastated by the 2004 tsunami, she borrowed money she was then unable to pay back. Desperate, poor, and with small children to feed, she agreed to sell her kidney. She says, because I was in a bad situation, we did not even have enough food to eat. The world is hardly new to the idea of commercializing our bodies in times of desperation, but one would have hoped we could aspire for better by now. But, before I go further, it falls to me, as it fell to my worthy opponent Tipple, to introduce the enemies of the night. Firstly, Mr. Callum Tipple, second-year Spanish and philosophy student at Hertford College. For those who do not know, the tradition of this house involves a friendly insulting of the opposing team. Unfortunately, Mr. Tipple is annoyingly demure and pleasant. His LinkedIn profile describes him as ambitious and proactive, which is unfortunately both true and unfunny. Determined to find at least one embarrassing or sordid fact to burn him in front of all you lovely people, I scoured the internet. I tracked his early Facebook activity, and I solicited the help of his friends, who turned out to be irritatingly loyal and unsympathetic to my cause. The only vague, promising story I have found has involved nipples. I have decided it is absolutely too salacious for these hallowed halls, and I'm keeping that. Next, we host Professor Radcliffe Richards, a professor of practical philosophy at Oxford, former director of the Centre of Bioethics and Philosophy of Medicine at UCL, and author of Organs for Sale. Targeted by the infamous anti-feminist blog A Voice for Reason in 2014, she's already firmly on my list of inspiring women and shall be joked at by no one. Finally, Professor John Harris, Professor of Bioethics at Manchester University, former editor-in-chief of the Journal of Medical Ethics, and author of An Ethical Market in Human Organs. He's similarly off my hit list because I'm a final year law student doing medical ethics as a course, and I really need him to like me enough to give me academic tips later. So, thus, ladies and gentlemen, I present to you your proposition for this motion. As far as the proposition would say, the argument goes that we are being paternalistic or squeamish. We do not value the autonomy of the individual, and we are depriving those in poverty of the chance to make an easy buck in a free market. As Miss Radcliffe Richards herself has said, the vendors are themselves anxious to sell and see this practice as the best option open to them. On the basis of these arguments, it would seem that Shylock is in business. But giving people in desperate poverty the option to sell their own organs would harm them beyond any value of autonomous choice or monetary benefit. How often do we hear the sentiment that someone on benefits does not deserve the help because they have managed to afford a TV or a fridge or a phone? I point out here the obvious point that a measure of disposable income does not a fortune make. If you give to those in poverty the option to sell their organs for money, you will invariably prompt these same people to ask why exactly people in poverty feel they are allowed to ask for our help or our sympathy, if they choose not to take the option of first butchering themselves to feed their families or send their children to university. What do you mean you can't pay the rent? You have 2 kidneys, don't you? Selling your organs becomes less of an option and more of a financial or even legal demand. Gerald Dworkin, who had spoken in opposition of this motion, actually supports me in this one. Once I'm aware I have a choice, my failure to choose that now counts against me. I can now be held responsible for events that, prior to the possibility of my choosing, were not attributable to me. I would point out also the uncomfortable ease by which those in comfortable means can idealise the great autonomy of entirely free choice, while fairly certain that they themselves will never experience that great liberated feeling of choosing surgery over keeping your family home. The value of autonomy must express more than simple self-determination. It requires freedom from external control or influence, an independence of choice that determines the value of the very act of self-determination. The autonomy of those who undergo nephrectomy, which is the surgical removal of kidneys, is mostly found between a rock and a hard place. In an article entitled "Economic and Health Consequences of Selling a Kidney in India," academics conducted a survey in 2001 of 305 individuals who had sold a kidney in India. This was 6 years after they'd sold the organ. If I may, I will now read out the summary of these findings. 96% of participants sold their kidneys to pay off debt. The average amount they received was $1,070. Most of the money received was spent on debt, food, or clothing. Average family income declined by 1/3 afterwards, and the number of participants living below the poverty line increased. 3/4 of participants were still in debt at the time of the survey. 86 reported deterioration in their health, what a shocker. And 79% would not recommend that others sell their kidney. Their conclusion: among paid donors in India, selling a kidney does not lead to a long-term economic benefit and may be associated with a decline in health. Physicians and policymakers should re-examine the value of using financial incentives to increase the supply of organs for transplantation. But this is India. The UK could be different, so let's be UK specific, shall we? There's absolutely no way that the NHS would ever be able to afford purchasing human organs to the extent that it would need to make any substantial difference to the current system if it was simultaneously competing with private sellers, both legal and illegal. Organs would be available only to rich private purchasers. The number of organs available to the poorest would shrink, and suddenly we'll lose the core ethic that started the NHS, our common belief that no human life should be deprived of proper medical care. And let's be clear. There is no amount of regulation that can stop a funneling upwards of organs from the desperately poor to the rich. I mean, what does the proposition suggest? The very poor people can't sell, or very rich people can't buy. The autonomous choice will always be one of coercive financial, legal, and social pressure, and the line will be drawn further and further away as to what we expect of poor people before we allow them to be the objects of our sympathy, respect, or aid. These people will be the sole providers of organs and never the recipients. This argument is not meant to diminish the suffering of those in need of organs or the severity of the current shortage. But the sale of human organs is not the only option available to us. While organs may not be growing on trees, they are growing in labs. We might have quite a few years to go, but in August last year, the BBC reported that for the first time, a functioning organ, a thymus, was grown from scratch inside an animal for the first time in Scotland. We also could create an opt-out system. An attempt to preserve a semblance of philanthropy, I would like to think, forms a part of our society. In a nationwide NHS survey, 53% of participants said that they would be a donor, but that they didn't know how to register, or they never thought about joining, or they hadn't got around to it. Spain and Australia have already shown vast improvements by applying this system and have done so without the dangers that this motion represents. There is an obsession with libertarian thinking which privileges the choice of the individual over everything else. When we conceptualize the choice of the individual, we speak from a privileged position where this choice is one of autonomy. But as I hope I have proven, and I imagine will be expanded upon by my fellows, this method of thinking is reductive of real-life experiences, particularly those of the poor, to whom this is in reality the most relevant. In summary, the seller of these transactions will not be the autonomous, free-thinking individuals the proposition would have you imagine, and they would certainly never benefit from a system into which they'd be the only ones paying the heaviest price. Secondly, as shown by numerous case studies involving India and even America, the realities of these schemes do not deliver the financial liberation that they promise. And third, this is not the only recourse open to us that could alleviate the situation we find ourselves in. And so, Mr. President, I beg the House to oppose this motion.
tourism recently in which people in the West go to impoverished countries to buy organs. Is this ethical behavior, Brother Shabir? We will discuss this now. Is it appropriate for people to buy organs from other people? I mean, does it depend on whether one's poor or rich? What are the specifications?
In terms of Islamic law, there is a fatwa online that I came across where the scholars are saying that it's not permissible to buy and sell organs.
Mm-hmm. What is the reasoning for that?
I mean,
this is also in line with many of the laws in Western countries as well.
Yes.
That one shouldn't buy organs, but one should donate it freely.
Yes, and this too was the nature of this legal ruling from the Islamic perspective. They didn't elaborate on why it is not allowed to buy and sell, though they did say that it's permissible to donate under certain conditions, which we might have a chance to discuss. But we have a sense of why it is not ethical to buy or sell organs. It is something so personal that it should not be turned into a commodity that is bought and traded and repossessed. It's something that is freely given as an act of love, in compassion for a person who is suffering, a person who is lacking something. So the typical thinking is that, look, I've got 2 kidneys and I can survive on one. The other person has got no functioning kidney. Let him have one of mine. So this is an act of compassion. It is a great gift, and the recipient of such a gift, we would expect, should not pay a one price and then walk away freely without any responsibility to the donor. But the recipient should really bind himself or herself ethically to a lifelong friendship with the donor and continue to see the donor as a benefactor, and in some small but continuous way continue to show acts of kindness towards the benefactor.
And I guess honoring the gift that is given to you by living a good and decent life.
Exactly, because every day that you have in your continuous life should be a reminder that somebody has done this act of kindness to you, and you should want to continue to repay that person with some acts of kindness, however small. So it's not a one price done for all, but a continued life of gratitude.
Mm-hmm. Can you comment on the situation in which people go to different countries and buy organs? And sometimes, they're buying an organ for a huge price, but the individual giving the organ doesn't necessarily see the money.
Yes, a case in point was highlighted recently in newspaper articles about a North York man who paid $120,000 for a kidney. And then he goes on to live a very luxurious life, having a lot of fun, traveling and so on. Whereas, on the other hand, what happens in another part of the world is that persons in these well-to-do countries who receive these organs get the organs from somebody in some impoverished country. It may be Kosovo, for example. And that person is promised something like $20,000. So there's a huge killing between the $120,000 that's paid through the whole process and the $20,000 that is promised to the individual who gives the organ. And then eventually it turns out that the poor person who is promised the $20,000 doesn't even get the $20,000. And there's hardly any follow-up medical care for that individual. The traces about them are even lost. So we don't even know who is that individual who donated the organ. And the doctors who perform this kind of operation make a killing from it. In one case, a certain doctor in Turkey has been dubbed Dr. Vulture in the region. And he boasts about how many of these he has performed. And apparently he's found a legal loophole to make it look like, it's a donation. The donor, the organ giver is donating the organ, not selling it. And so he gets away without the legal repercussions. But at the same time, Interpol is looking for an Israeli financier who was a middleman in some of these operations, collecting the money and then arranging for the transplant to be done.
Now, this is not an isolated incident. There are many situations like this in many parts of the world, where people from the West go and buy organs. And in many cases, the donors, aren't necessarily given appropriate care, so that they suffer significantly after donating.
Yes, and that's, it's even worse in the case of persons who had no idea that this was going to be done. I mean, in the case when there was some kind of mutual understanding, that's one level. But another level was brought to light when a man showed up at Pristina Airport in Kosovo, and he fell unconscious. He had proclaimed, "Somebody stole my kidneys." And they found that his abdomen was newly cut. It turns out in further investigation that sometimes children are taken from orphanages and their organs removed and again sold in this kind of black market organ trafficking ring. So these are terrible events that we're noticing in our modern world, and it brings
Someone
us back
has dubbed
to
it the illegal harvesting of the poor, which
Yes.
is a very scary term, but it seems to fit.
Yes, and these are ugly realities that we're facing in modern times, showing that as much as we have developed in medical technology, we have advanced in science and in many different ways, but the development of the human character and spirit is actually falling behind. We are in fact diminishing in the great character that God has actually equipped us with, a character that should be expressing kindness and be the source of acts of generosity, is really the opposite now, and we're seeing cruelty and the taking advantage of the disadvantaged.
So what does Islam say about donating organs? You've suggested some things initially, but maybe you can go into what the conditions are for donating an organ.
Yes, first we should say that in classical times there was no sense of donating organs, because first of all there was no medical technology that would allow a person to do this kind of transplant. It was being done in the plant kingdom. It was noticed that you can actually take a part of one plant and graft it into another one and get a different result. You can increase the level of crops and so on in certain ways. So people were experimenting with these things, and this was known to be allowed. It's even mentioned in the hadith regarding the Prophet, peace be upon him, that he allowed for this. So it was only a matter of time for technologies to so advanced to now being able to apply the same principle with humans and animals. And with humans in particular, we had the sense that, you just simply bury the dead person very quickly, and that's the respectful way of dealing with the dead. Again, because there was nothing to do there was no way of harvesting organs at the time, and cutting up the body would have been pointless and sacrilegious. It would have been wrong to do that. So that's what Muslims are accustomed to. But in our modern world, when there are ways of using the organs of a dead person, so one has to now ask himself or herself, would I rather that my dead body just simply be buried into the earth to disintegrate, or would I rather that the parts of my body go towards some good cause, helping some person who is struggling to stay alive, but they cannot stay alive without the parts of my body, especially the vital organs. So why not donate this? This would be not then an act of kindness, of generosity. It will be a sadaqah. It will fall within the principles of our religion of doing good, even after we have passed away. So this is the greatest thing we can do, because while we're alive, we cherish these organs. We don't want to give them away, even if we could. And at least we can give them away after we die. So this is going to fetch great reward, I believe, in the life hereafter with God.
Can one give an organ when one is alive? I mean, I know there's a principle that one must prevent harm to one's own body. So how does that work?
Well, what the scholars have said in that fatwa that I referred to, that religious verdict, is that if you will not remove an essential feature of the body, like let's say vision, by donating one cornea, you still have one and you still have some vision. So this is allowed. But if you're going to donate both, this is not allowed, because then you're really giving up an essential feature. More than this, or we should say worse than this, would be to cause your own death by giving away a vital organ, let's say a heart. Well, of course you need a heart. So you're not allowed to kill yourself to do that. But of course, if you can give, let's say, a kidney and still survive on one, a piece of the liver, and you still are okay. Blood, there is no issue because this regenerates itself, and any such thing that regenerates, and you manage very well by after donating. All of this should be taken as acts of charity, and there's no harm in doing them.
All right, thank you for that, Brother Shabir.
You're welcome.
We'll take a break. When we return, we answer questions we've received from you, our viewers.